Hi, this is David Dickens, and today we are covering one of my favorite types of episodes, some listener questions. We've got a fellow who says his brother tells him he has way too much money in the bank, and is that good or bad? And another who is considering getting a second financial advisor so that they can get multiple ideas from multiple people. And so we're going to explore those. Hopefully there's something in here just for you. I'll go get Walter, and we'll get started.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another edition of Cover Your Assets KC. I'm Walter Storholt alongside David Dickens, of course, President, Wealth Advisor of Creative One Advisors Group, based in the Kansas City area and serving clients really from wherever you are. Easy to get in touch. Check us out online at creativeoneadvisorsgroup.com. And David, it is our 300th episode of the podcast today. Pretty fun to hit that milestone. So congrats are in order to you.
Yeah, thank you. How is that even possible, Walter?
It means we've been doing this a long time.
That means I'm a really old guy.
I believe back in 2018 was the first official episode of the podcast. And
wow.
I know there was a radio show there for a few years thrown in as well that might have blurred the lines between radio and podcasting. But, you know, by our numbers, it's number 300. So we're going to run with it.
I love that. You know, the one thing that I have noticed about these, which I didn't think about at first, because things change in the financial world pretty often. They are not necessarily evergreen. So if you go back and listen to something from 20 or 21 or 22, the laws might have changed and it's not helpful. So, you know, for anybody who dives into old podcast archives, you get a year or two back and you want to do some pretty good checking on the content to make sure that it's still valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, the archive is there for you to check out for sure. And there's plenty of good stuff in there, David, and lessons that'll be applicable, I think, today and beyond. But yeah, to have the proper context for when things change, especially if we start talking about taxes and laws and, hey, this new law just came up and that sort of thing. Yeah, we've had COVID happen since this show started, and that sort of like changed the whole world, right? So.
Right. So the two questions we have today are way more evergreen than anything regarding tax law. So hopefully these will live on for a while.
Trivia question for you, and then we'll get into the two questions from our listeners on today's show. Do you remember what the topic was of your very first episode?
Oh, my. I have absolutely no clue.
Required minimum distributions. You started off with a bang.
Oh, and that question lives on and on in my office.
On and on. That's right. You did get to your Roth IRAs in episode number 3, so it didn't take you long to become the king of Roth IRA conversations.
Yeah, that was always my favorite. Still is, unless you get an HSA, and then it's even better.
Yep, exactly. Anyway, I thought it'd be fun to look back and see what number 1 was.
That's pretty good.
All right, speaking of number 1, let's get to our first question of the day. You teased it a little bit a few moments ago, but here's the full question. My brother tells me that I have way too much money in the bank, and he's probably right. It's about $120,000 now, but I just like knowing that it's there in case I have an emergency. So is that so bad?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily bad, but it's likely for you a missed opportunity. You mentioned, you know, you like having an emergency fund, or you said in case of an emergency. And so emergency funds in this business tend to be measured in about 6 months of living expenses. Now, you probably don't spend $240,000 a year. You might, and if that's the case, well, you have the perfect size of emergency fund. But it's probably way bigger than what you need. And we don't know that you're retired, but you kind of sound like you are. And so you probably have other pockets of money that you could dip into if you had a real emergency. So, you know, we don't know anything about your risk tolerance, your age, your net worth. We don't know how healthy you are. And all those things, if you were sitting in our office, we would delve into to figure out, well, how much should you actually have? We don't know if you have access to other liquid funds, IRAs or inherited money or et cetera. We don't know when your required distributions start. I guess one question we'd ask if you were sitting in the office is, do you currently make more than you spend? If you're retired, the question is, does your Social Security and your pension income, is that more than what you spend? In other words, you have excess money left over at the end of every month, and the $120,000 is actually growing every month. And if that's the case, you probably do have too much money sitting in something that is probably fairly idle. So a lot of bank accounts that we see, they're going to pay interest rate of maybe 1/10 of 1% to 1/4 of 1%. I talked to a lady just last week that has a online only bank account that pays her 3%. So I wasn't worried about that account. But let's just say that this 120 grand is sitting there earning a quarter of 1%. So that earns you about $300 a year in interest. If you put that into another, let's say a bank CD or a money market that's paying you 3 or 3.5 or 4%. So let's say that you put it into some CDs which are very low risk fixed income investments, and you were going to earn 3.5% on that. Well, that's $4,200 a year. So in that particular example, bank account earning $300, a bank CD earning $4,200, that's an extra roughly $4,000 that you could have in your pocket every year for really not taking on additional risk. A CD, I don't think many people would call that to be a risky investment. So, this is not specific advice for you. If you really want to have bank money, if that makes you feel really good about being able to drive down the street and walk into your bank, then if they have some sort of money market account that is paying you maybe 2.5 or 3%, and I'll bet they don't, but if they do, that's a way better alternative than having it sitting somewhere in a savings account or a checking account. If they offer short-term CDs, I just checked I bank at a credit union here in Kansas City. Their CDs between 6 months and a year are currently yielding around 3.5 to 4%. So you're not really locking your money up for a long time. So that would give you that extra $4,000 a year in your pocket. And my guess is if you were walking along the sidewalk and you saw $4,000, you'd bend over and pick it up. So I would just check it out and make sure that you have that 120,000 employed at something that is earning you some return. If you're okay with some uncertainty, like you really don't have to have bank money, maybe you have a brokerage account. Maybe you could own some short-term bonds. If you own treasuries, what your CPA is going to tell you is that the interest on that is not taxable at the state level. So that's a nice little benefit. You might, if you're a little more adventurous, you might have some dividend-paying stocks. The dividends are taxed advantageously. Hopefully over time, they would have a long-term capital gain because you didn't need the $120,000 for an emergency. And both long-term capital gains and dividends are taxed advantageously. What does that mean? Well, if you find yourself in the 10 or the 12% tax bracket, then from a federal tax standpoint, those dividends and long-term capital gains are taxed at zero. Now, Topeka is going to still tax them, or Jeff City is going to tax them, but the federal government isn't if you're in the 10 or 12% bracket. So you probably have a lot of alternatives. And I just encourage you to maybe chat with your brother. I don't usually recommend that. I would encourage you to chat with your advisor if you have one. We'd be happy to chat with you if you'd like. But you probably have a higher and better value investment that you would put that in and still keep it pretty liquid and pretty safe, maybe with a significant portion of that. Either way, good luck to you, and thanks for the question.
I'm chuckling a little bit because I don't know how many times over the last 300 episodes, David, you've probably said something like, careful with that advice that you got from your brother. So to hear you say, chat some more with your brother is, counterintuitive, but you certainly see why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. Those conversations always seem to come down to that opportunity cost as well. What are we missing out on by not being as efficient as we can, which is a lot of what that seems to boil down to. So it just gives you something to think about, and hopefully that helps our question asker today as well.
Agreed. And sometimes you just have to sit down with a calculator and quantify it. And you say, well, for a couple $100, I'm not worried about it. But a couple $1,000, I'll spend a little time to figure out a couple $1,000 answer if I'm putting that in my pocket. So, put a little calculator to it and see what you're missing out on.
Yeah. This one change gets you an extra vacation or trip a year or something, like that's tangible. And I think people can start to wrap their heads around that kind of thing. So that's great. All right, really intriguing next question for you, David. By the way, if you have questions for David and want to talk to him and the team one-on-one about your situation, you can always reach out by calling 913-317-1414 and get more specific guidance for your specific situation. 913-317-1414. Again, we've got contact information in the description of today's show for you as well. This question will be interesting. I'm considering working with a new financial advisor, but only with half of my money. I want to keep the other half with a different advisor. Would this be a good idea so that I'd be able to get advice from multiple people?
Well,
I like that. It's like on a football team, you've got multiple coaches, David. So
Well,
You're getting
funny you mentioned that because I'm going to finish this answer with a football analogy.
well. There we go. All right.
Okay, so the long and the short of it, and I had tried really hard to come up with a 5-minute answer for this question, but I'll bet I run long. But I'm not a fan of this strategy. It sounds like you already have an advisor because you're considering working with a new financial advisor. So it sounds like you have an advisor and you want to add a second one. So my first question is, what is it that you don't like about your current advisor or the advice you're getting from that person? In other words, what problem are you trying to fix by adding what I would consider to be unnecessary complexity to your situation? Based on what I've seen in the past, you're very likely to end up with competing strategies or ones that work against each other. And unless you're really good with financial stuff, you're not going to know that you have competing strategies or that they are working against each other until something goes wrong. So in the financial world, I kind of boiled it down to 3 different options. One is that you hire an advisor, which evidently you've already done, and you hold them accountable because you're not you don't want to be a do-it-yourselfer. Maybe you could be, you just don't want to be. You hold that advisor accountable for the success of your plan. First of all, for having a plan. Second of all, for the success of that plan when you meet with them, let's just say semi-annually. Maybe you have a desire to have downside protection. You want to mitigate losses. If the market's down 20%, you've told this person, I only want to be down 5 or 7%. And you can measure that. You want to make sure that they're paying attention to your beneficiaries and maybe some estate planning suggestions, even though they're not your estate planning attorney. You want to make sure that you have an income plan. Maybe it's written because yours is complicated. Maybe it's just an understanding. And then you want to make sure that this person has an idea of how to be tax efficient with your money. So that's option 1. That's the way the vast majority of people do it. And if your current advisor is not doing that kind of thing, I think the smarter strategy would be to go find an advisor who would and not split up your attention between 2 advisors. Your second option, I think, and it could be a good one, if you were doing a big construction project on your house, somebody needs to be the general contractor. So if you think of your portfolio as your financial house, somebody has to be the general contractor, and usually that's your advisor, but maybe you want to be the general contractor yourself. I can think of a number of people in my brain that are that for themselves. They might then hire an equities guy. In most cases, it could be a sub-advisor, but maybe it's just an array of ETFs or mutual funds that they chose. As the general contractor, they say, well, I want to have 40, 50, 60, 70% of my money in the stock market, and I need different components to that. So somebody has to choose those. Maybe you hire an advisor who's particularly good at that. Maybe you just pick your own ETFs. You can have a bond guy because in retirement, most times you have some sort of fixed income component. Maybe that is government bonds. It could be high-grade corporates. It could be municipal bonds because of your tax bracket. Maybe you're going to do it all with ETFs instead of individual bonds. Maybe you're good with fixed annuities and you want to have a fixed annuity component to your fixed income strategy. Then you might have an annuity component, and maybe you need an annuity guy for that. Whether that is for income planning, maybe it's just for one of your safety components in your portfolio. And then you're probably going to have an insurance guy. And you might say, well, Dave, I don't need insurance anymore. Well, a lot of my clients do. Maybe they've gone to their pension plan and they've just had it based on their life, not them and their spouses. Maybe they want an accelerated death benefit to help them cover long-term care expenses. Maybe they have an inheritance component that they want to fund partially with insurance. So you probably end up having an insurance guy in retirement as well. That was a long description of the second option when you're the general contractor. But if you're going to cover all the bases, you need to cover all those bases. I think the third option would be having 2 advisors. My guess is, based on what I've seen when people have 2 advisors, they pay a lot less attention. They will have overlaps. They almost never talk, and they really don't know what the other advisor is doing. They're going to have income strategies and risk strategies that are going to differ, and they're probably going to take some they're going to have some overlaps with tax efficiencies, which you won't know about until tax time next year. So I think that is a distant third option for you. But again, this is not specific advice because we don't know you. I was talking with an advisor about 6 months ago, so it's a pretty fresh example. He was talking about a client who came to him with 2 other advisors, and he was the third. Now, one of the advisors was a broker, so there's a big difference there, a fiduciary or not. But the third person was an advisor. Nobody knew what the others were doing. We were having a drink after a conference, so he was going on about it. But nobody knew what the other advisors or brokers were doing. So they had strategy allocation problems. The client didn't share the information between what the other advisors were doing. There were tax time surprises with trying to offset gains and losses. There was a poorly timed Roth conversion. As I recall, the risk allocation, once this person who was an actual advisor and fiduciary tried to pull together a bunch of information from the other advisor holdings, and they found out that the risk allocation was way out of balance. What ended up happening, funny enough, was this client moved to, I think it was Arizona, and she didn't fire all 3 of these people, but what she did say, she left all 3 of these people for one person in Arizona that she felt like she could go in and sit down in front of and actually talk to. Well, we had a good laugh about that, but I loved that idea. So whether she did it because she wanted to have somebody physically in front of her, or she was tired of the unintended consequences of having 2 or 3 advisors, I don't know that answer, but I loved the result of having one person in her hometown where she could go in and see quarterly, semi-annually, annually, whatever your thing is. But that ended up, I thought, being a terrific solution. Now, this advisor lost a client, but yeah, I bet in reflection, he was happy for her that she was going to get better service. I promised a football analogy.
You did. I'm waiting for the Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs reference, or maybe since we're talking about like coaching here, it's an Andy Reid direction. What you got?
I hadn't put names to this, but that's a beautiful idea. Let's just say I'm Clark Hunt.
Okay.
You are the Clark Hunt. Oh, everybody on this podcast knows who that is. So you're the owner of your football team, and you hire a head coach, and you are, unless you own the Jets, which is an incredibly poorly run franchise, you are not going to be micromanaging your head coach, but you're not going to hire a second head coach either. You're going to hire one, and that head coach is going to hire and manage and fire the coordinators and the position coaches that work for him. So the head coach reports to you. The advisor reports to you. And it's up to you to know what you want out of the performance of your team, the performance of your portfolio. But it's not up to you to select the coordinators and the position coaches, because it's highly likely that you are not qualified to do that. It's not like you're not smart enough. I have a lot of doctors and engineers I work with, and it's not like they're really smart people, but this isn't their thing. As the advisor, the head coach over this person's portfolio, which he and his spouse are the absolute owners of their team, their portfolio, I operate as the head coach, and I hire the coordinators and the position coaches. That might be a set of ETFs. It might be some individual bonds. It might be a Roth conversion strategy. But those are the things that they're paying me to know how to do so that they don't have to. But at the end of, in our meetings, they're just going to want to report on, well, how are we doing? Not necessarily how are you getting it done, but how are we doing? And they're going to pretty much know we're doing well, or you're underperforming, Mr. Head Coach. And sometimes as a head coach, you get fired. Sometimes you pick up a new owner because they fired their old head coach because it just wasn't going well. So this was I knew I couldn't do this in 5 minutes. I probably haven't done this in 15 minutes. But I think the answer is, as the owner of your portfolio, unless you're a really good do-it-yourselfer, you probably want to hire a qualified head coach who knows how to build a team. That includes coordinators, position coaches, and players. And your job is to manage the head coach to make sure that the outcomes you're happy with. And if you're not, talk to the head coach, explain why you're not happy, see if some changes can be made. And if appropriate changes can't be made, fire the head coach and go find one who can. That's what I would encourage you to do instead of having multiple people reporting up to you, working on this portfolio for you.
I love it. Be the GM of your own life, of your own financial life, and that's a great way to look at it. And hiring that coach to do all the work and the coordinating and everything else for you. It's funny with your football analogy. I don't know if there's ever been like a two head coach team. I don't think anybody, at least not at the high levels, right? I'm sure high schools have maybe done some sort of model like that, but at the high levels, you never see it. But you do see teams, especially in college sometimes, appoint like co-offensive coordinators or co-defensive coordinators, which would be like a co-vice president, in political terms, I guess. I've always found that funny because it's kind of still that same conundrum of two people doing the same position.
That's true. And and Andy Reid on the pro level is actually, we have an offensive coordinator, but honestly, it seems like Andy is kind of the guy on offense. But oftentimes when a coordinator becomes a head coach, he likes to bring his responsibilities with him. And after about a year or two, when it's not going so well, he hires the coordinator to replace himself, and he just runs the organization.
Yeah.
And the most successful franchises have typically been that. I mean, Belichick, he was a defensive guy. And for all I know he had a defensive coordinator. It's really hard to do multiple jobs, especially when you don't know what you're doing. And I mentioned the Jets earlier, but that owner is a meddling mess. And any Jets fan that's listening to this is going to be nodding their head going, yes, he is.
They have a track record of bad decisions, that's for sure.
They do. You just got to know what you know. And maybe more importantly, know what you don't know, and hire professionals, qualified professionals, to circle around you and bring you some success.
Yep. All good points. It's a great question. Thanks for sending that one in to us. And again, if you have specific questions for David, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach him by calling 913-317-1414 and talk one-on-one with David and the team about your specific situation, or go online to creativeoneadvisorsgroup.com to check out past episodes and more great resources and information as well. Links and contact info in the description of today's show to find it easily. Well, David, thanks for the breakdown on these two great questions, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Thanks. Hope you do too. And you know what? Congratulations to you on 300 as well. 300.
Woohoo. They've been fun, and I appreciate it. And thanks so much, everybody, for listening. Hope you've enjoyed some of those 300. And we'll look forward to talking to everybody again next time right here on Cover Your Assets, KC.
Creative One Advisors Group has been proudly serving families in the Kansas City metropolitan area since 2003. Over the years, we've evolved to help meet the needs of our clients, becoming KC Financial Advisors in 2010. In November 2021, our advisory business was acquired by Creative One Wealth, LLC, C1W, and in January 2025, we officially adopted the name Creative One Advisors Group. Previous episodes were recorded under the branding of KC Financial Advisors, which has since been rebranded as Creative One Advisors Group. Any references to KC Financial Advisors should now be understood as referring to Creative One Advisors Group. Investment advisory services are offered through Creative One Wealth, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Creative One Advisors Group is a DBA of Creative One Wealth. Insurance services are offered through licensed insurance professionals. Investment advisory services are provided in accordance with the fiduciary duty of care and loyalty that includes putting your interest first and disclosing conflicts. Insurance services have a best interest standard, which requires recommendations to be in your best interest. Creative One Wealth is not affiliated with or endorsed by any government agency and does not provide tax, legal, or estate planning advice or services. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. No investment strategy can guarantee a profit or protect against loss. Neither asset allocation nor diversification can ensure a profit or guarantee against losses. None of the information contained herein shall constitute an offer to sell or solicit any offer to buy a security or any insurance product. Insurance product guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing company. The Creative One family of companies includes Creative One Wealth, LLC, a registered investment advisor, Creative One Securities, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor, and Creative One Marketing, LLC. These companies share common ownership. Additional details regarding advisory services are available in our firm's ADV Part 2A and Form CRS.